Today's presentation is, we're talking about a community collaboration within the U.S. federal government with industry and academia and standards organizations. He made it work. He brought us the connector.
Oh, okay.
Specifically, how many of you, whenever you've been trying to do your job and you were thinking security, somebody viewed you as an obstructionist? Yeah, you're just trying to do your job, trying to do the right thing. Well, we're here to say that more and more people are basically awakening to the reality that says if you didn't factor security in up front, you're going to have trouble down the line. So that's why we talk about security enhanced processes and practices. I'm doing this today with Stan Wisseman, who is one of the chapter presidents for Owasp. He's also on our software assurance teams, chairing one of our working groups that we do with industry and federal agencies and standards bodies. And the reason that we've started this whole activity has been to really focus on the fact that our enterprises today do not just bring in code that they develop themselves, and they don't usually just bring in things that they bought from somebody else, but it's really a mix of those things. And when you start looking at what that is, I typically, people think, well, I'm buying from this reputable supplier that's here, but are you really aware of who that supplier's supply chain is? And that's why you have to be aware of, as a consumer, you take on a different role rather than just being a normal developer or an acquirer that you've got.
Yeah, sorry, we're recording, so you can't walk too far.
Okay. Well, but we also know that most of the time in-house we bring in something, and even if it's nothing more than just the glue code, bringing in those applications that we brought and said we're going to make them work for our consumers. We do development. In fact, from a security perspective, that's usually the best place to exploit an enterprise is the glue code, because they weren't really thinking. Believe it or not, from a normal development perspective, the COTS perspective, even the open source software, we're finding out people are becoming more security aware so that there is something. But just take that in consideration, that when we talk about quality, you should also be thinking security, and it should never be as a standalone function what we do. That's why we look at security enhanced capabilities. And we look at today's global supply chain, because that's the reality. We are in a global market. The software that you have inside your enterprise or who you're delivering typically involves those across the globe. But we have to be able to look at software engineering, quality assurance, testing, project management. They must explicitly address security risks that are posed by exploitable software. You can look at all the other things, and we're going to talk about this application software itself is what's putting us at risk if we haven't factored that in, because our traditional processes do not look at it. And mitigating the supply chain risk is not just a developer's problem. We can blame it on the developer, say, they're the ones who did it to me. No, it turns out that we as consumers are typically part of the problem as well. So we have to look at our enterprise risks that are stemming from the supply chain are influenced by suppliers and the acquisition projects. When we talk in terms of risk management, in terms of our acquisition projects, we typically view as the risk to my project, meaning can I deliver on cost, schedule, and performance, without understanding the true residual risk that's being passed on to the consumer, the user of this. And so I'm going to be asking you, at the end of the day, when you look at the projects that you're involved in, 5 years from now, will you be able to say, I left my organization or the consumer in a more secure, resilient mode, or was it one that was just good enough to get the customer to sign off on without them truly understanding the residual risk? And that's why we're saying that our practices that we have today must span development as well as acquisition. And we have to start looking at derived requirements or non-explicit security requirements. They must be elicited and considered. So we're going to look at what is it that we as developers or as consumers should be doing to make sure that this is factored in what we're doing. But we also know practices alone in this arena of security are not enough. We have to have scale in terms of more comprehensive diagnostic capabilities used throughout the life cycle so that developers, testers, even consumers can better understand the code that they have. It's really about providing transparency for more informed decision making. The reality is we are never going to be 100% risk-free in this environment, but you must be informed. You must have information to understand your residual risk exposure so that you can take action to do that. Today, we as consumers have no information, and we're stuck with that. And what we've done, why is it? Because software is so robust. We do a lot of things with it. We've been developing our applications, but then people started thinking about security, so we built up firewalls. We put up DMZs. But now what do we do for web application? Hey, we're finding ways to punch right on through that. In fact, I've gone to conferences where people are saying, this is how you get around your firewall. It's like, we're doing that because we're trying to reach out with the web-facing applications, our services, our connectivity to our partners. And a lot of this we do both in-house and also the outsourcing. We want to connect with our partners. So we're doing it to ourselves, but then we didn't design those applications to be either coexistent with, on the same platform with other applications, and many of those early applications were not ever envisioned to even be on the web, but now we've made them web-enabled. And so rather attempt to break into and through your security barriers that you have, and again, I know many of you have firewalls and DMZs, and you've put on security controls of the software, but the reality is we're just going right around them. Why should I bother to punch through your security? Because we know, and it depends on which source you're reading, between 75 to 90% of all hacking today is at the application level. It's not going through your security controls. Most exploitable software vulnerabilities today are attributable to non-secure programming practices. But we don't catch it in testing. And we say that functional correctness must be exhibited even when software is subjected to the abnormal hostile conditions. Most people are involved in tests make sure that it works correctly under the normal situations. The reality is we've got a lot of clueless users out there and they can do things to us. But we're finding out more and more we've got people just like to see what they can do to break things. We did that as students. We're finding out people are still doing it. And today it's even sponsored and there's criminal activities behind it as well. So that's why in an era riddled with asymmetric cyber attacks, any claims about system reliability, integrity, or safety must include provisions for the built-in security.
What do you mean by asymmetric? What's your definition of that?
Of asymmetric, you've got of being able to attack you at any place and time of their choosing, and I'll get into some of the ways that we describe that. And that's why we say, well, the security controls are necessary. You want to put on your padlocks, you want to be able to put in your firewalls, but it's not sufficient in today's environment. There's no need to break the locks when you can gain it through exploitable products. So when we talk about software assurance, certainly we want to be able to say, address defects. And in fact, there are people say it's all you need is 100% defect-free code and you'll have security. Well, that assumes that malicious code or malware is a defect. But I will tell you, most of the time it runs better than software. In fact, you can't even detect it in most cases. So we're dealing with anything that might be embedded in software anytime during its life cycle that could be exploited. And unfortunately, we're finding out that even some products today are coming into the market, even before they've been deployed and put into use, already have malicious code in them. And that's a challenge for us. And CIOs have identified that as a big challenge. You know, when you do individual questions of individual CIOs and you ask them, are your networks and systems secure? Absolutely. But if you make it anonymous and do a survey, turns out that it's not the rich feature